Welcome to the Making Sense of Martech podcast, where we interview leaders and put them in the hot seat. I'm Jacqueline Friedman, founder of Monarch and global head of advisory for Martech Weekly. Let's dive in and meet Natalie Miles Fuerst and a little bit about her. Natalie is the staff product manager for marketing technology at Grammarly, where she's shaping how massive volumes of data and messaging drive scalable, personalized marketing. Formerly, she's the head of Martech and personalization at Chime, which actually just went public. Congratulations. And she oversaw marketing ops at Credit Karma. She's an expert in assembling composable CDPs and building bridges between engineering and marketing teams. She's a vocal advocate for experimentation first culture, and she even co authored a chapter on aligning customer engagement to revenue in the customer engagement book, Adapt or Die by Mo Engage. So excited to have you. I have a personal bias of excitement because we've done the same job at Grammarly. And so I'm so happy you're here. And I've got a soul sister for life. And let's do some rapid fire just to kind of get started. How's that
Yeah.
sound?
Yeah, it sounds like a good plan. We always
All
do
right.
rapid fire with each other.
That
This
is
is every
true.
interaction.
That is true. I feel like we're always in the hot seat with each
Yeah.
other. I'm just like, what happened here? How do I do this?
Sometimes it feels like we've lived the same life.
We kind of have.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I am so grateful that you're here.
My pleasure.
All right. Are you a morning person or a night owl?
Definitely a night owl. I wish I was a morning person. Morning people, just have this aura about them, like they've got it together. Honestly, I work best at night. I feel like when everything's calm and dead and there's no children interrupting is when I can do my real focus work. But
I
yeah,
think we're the same person.
always a night owl.
Same here. All right. What is your favorite MarTech tool that you cannot work without? And
Mm.
get specific.
So a year ago, I would have just said a Google Sheet, like the joke of what's the most common used by a marketer? A CSV file. Honestly, ChatGPT or Claude, use it for everything. That's not to say I use it to outsource my thinking and decisions, but using it as a thought partner. I basically treat it like a really brilliant intern who is also kind of naive and dumb about something. So very much still believe in human in the loop and we need to be vibe checkers, but yeah, probably far and away most used tool.
Okay. Speaking of vibes, vibe coding, yay or nay?
Nay on the term. It does feel a little cringe and embarrassing to say, but yeah, it's oddly addictive. Recently, I'm really loving Lovable. Honestly, it's just so fun. I've been vibe coding this
Yes.
coloring book app for my kids. There's so many applications and the ability to, get out of your own head and execute on something that has lived in this amorphous space forever is so gratifying. It is just fun. I can't remember the last time I've had fun with a tool before.
I completely agree. And it's also like the playground in which you make. And so you get to have a lot of fun there. I'm excited. There's a couple, I think, lovable announcements happening in a couple this week, next week, in a
Yeah,
few
yeah,
weeks.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
I'm so
looking
excited
forward
to
to
see
it.
this space. Yeah.
Excited for Elena Verna's touch and all the
Yes.
things
Yes.
in particular. Okay, last rapid fire question. Who is someone you admire, professionally or personally?
And this is a difficult one. I sort of subscribe to the never meet your heroes because the people who I admire professionally often don't have the personal life I admire, and then vice versa. Obviously Jacqueline Friedman for but let me just
Don't
say
you dare.
I I am so eternally grateful. Everyone should know how wonderful you are to work with. And again, thank you eternally for setting me up for this role at Grammarly and giving me
Oh,
the ins and the outs. I always trust your opinions. Yeah,
oh,
thank you.
right back at you. I wish we actually got to work together.
I
Instead,
know,
we
I
just got
know.
to work together on the education piece of how to do the things.
Yeah, two ships passing each other at night. The other people I would say I admire professionally, I had the privilege of working with some really great marketers at Credit Karma. In some ways, it spoiled me and made me think marketing was something that maybe it's not. Just such an amazing Credit Karma circa 2016 to 2020 was just a really special marketing org. We had an amazing CMO and Greg Lowell, really amazing marketing leadership. The amount of CMOs that came out of that Credit Karma marketing cohort is really impressive. And so, yeah, learned a lot. It was a really great place to to really learn marketing and like what marketing should be, like very data driven in my mind, very low ego, very experimentation focused.
Amazing. It sounds like an incredible incubator ultimately.
It was, yeah.
That's awesome. All right. This is my personal favorite question to ask whenever I'm hiring, and it immediately tells me if it's someone that would work on my team or in the greater team. So, what is your biggest F up? Because I've got plenty, but let's hear yours.
Yeah. There's like F ups that were like very valuable learning opportunities. Mine's just kind of funny. Like, there were
The
some things to learn,
funnier,
but
the better.
oh God. So I had recently joined Chime, and at the time, as you do in sort of like a scrappy environment, you wear many hats. And so I was also wearing a lifecycle marketing hat and being in the financial services space. We send a lot of transactional emails, especially, change in terms type emails. And so like every lifecycle
Just a
marketer,
little
yeah,
important. Just
like we never want to send those emails, but we gotta. And so like you get in the habit of like compliance or legal comes to you with this boilerplate change in terms agreement that you need to blast everyone with. Like sometimes you gussy it up, sometimes, you just ship it out the door because you got more important things to do and no one reads these. This was a situation where like, yeah, we had gussied it up and then we sent it to our entire addressable audience. And it turns out one of the phone numbers in there, because you always have to have like a phone number in these compliance emails, it went to not Chime, but a sex hotline. And
oh my goodness.
I mean,
That
fortunately, no one
that's a
called
good one.
the numbers, like, because
Are
no
we
one reads those
sure?
emails. Well, one person did.
Okay. And that person emailed you immediately.
And so it turns out, like, and to be fair, this was also posted on our website, and the compliance person, like,
Oh no, the QA failed all across the board.
it was sort of like that game of telephone where like we grab it from one place and then hand it over to the next person, then they hand it over. But lesson learned, when you're QAing your emails, also QA the phone numbers and make sure they
Yeah,
work.
that's amazing and also a really great case for why you should never have a no reply that is not monitored and is not a real email.
Yeah, yeah.
Because how quickly did you guys discover the situation
Oh, it
after
took a
it's
while. I mean, it's not like it blew up on social media or anything, but yeah, it was certainly embarrassing when we found out.
that's fair. Also, just like such a great reminder of QA as a team sport. Of
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The retro on that was in like, there's always that temptation to want to point fingers and blame
course,
everyone. And,
no one
of
wants to
course,
take
like,
ownership.
yeah, like Lifecycle wanted to blame compliance, like compliance was like, well, I'm the fifth person who was in charge of this. And, at the end of the
Right.
day, like last mile, we're the ones sending out the email. Like we should take responsibility and make sure like all the I's and are dotted and T's are crossed.
I agree with a caveat of receipts
Yeah,
of all
yeah, yeah.
approvals. Of there were a lot of eyes on this before we clicked send.
I think that, like the other valuable part is like, of course, this was a rush job. Like all these like change in terms emails often are.
That's where all of them happen. That's where the mistakes happen.
And so like, there's always the opportunity cost of like, you want us to ship this quickly. Mistakes are going to happen. And so I think the real outcome was like, all right, we need at least 24 to 48 hours for, decent QA.
Good. At
So some
least
good came of
lesson learned. Yeah, some good came of
it.
it, and maybe some extra traffic to a certain
Yeah.
phone number. Open some people's eyes.
I wish I remembered where it went to.
Oh, yeah, that'd be quite the plug.
Yeah.
Speaking of mistakes, I don't think there's any mistakes. I think things are always learning opportunities in some capacity, and that's not me being positively optimistic. But have you ever had to deal with reversing a Martech decision that was major? And like, what were the signs? What were the reasons? And what did you learn from it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the nature of the job. I mean, like we've all broken up with vendors because like we all get sold promises that don't pan out in reality.
You mean
So
salespeople lie?
I know. I mean,
Wow.
maybe they don't necessarily lie, but everyone's, business model is different. Everyone's workflows are different. Like
Everyone
things
stretches the
are,
truth in different ways.
yeah, yeah. We all have different needs. Recent situation, like we had to break up with a vendor. I mean, partly some of this is, you know, on me and the org and understanding what the strategy is. So, like, we're going all in on personalization. I think personalization always kills me a little bit, but, from a strategy standpoint, what exactly do we want to do with personalization? And we were trying to move so fast. We onboarded a personalization tool to personalize copy. We successfully implemented it. At the end of the day, did it have an impact on growth and metrics we care about? Not really, because it turns out optimizing a subject line is only going to get you so far. And probably what we should have done more due diligence on was understanding the underlying pricing model, because when it came time to renew, it just wasn't very scalable. The ROI wasn't there. And so, we spent all this year like developing this tool, integrating it into our workflows, only to find out, it's not really impactful and this isn't something we can continue to invest in. So had to pull the plug. And also, it turns out coffee is very commoditized right now. And
It
if
is.
your tool is only doing that and is a single use SaaS product, like, you don't have much of a moat.
Yeah, there's a lot of breaking down of moats lately,
Yeah.
some to very interesting approaches, we'll to say.
Yeah.
All right, I want to get into nitty-gritty because you, I think, in my opinion, are one of the very few has overseen extremely high volume sending, not just at Grammarly, but at Chime and Credit Karma. And there's very few people who've been able to navigate and also succeed in that space. So what is the biggest challenge you've experienced or you see when you're scaling an audience and segmentation and deliverability at such scale where we're thinking, I'm going to say at least a starting line of minimum 5 billion emails a year. I'm scared to
Yeah.
know what the
Yeah.
upper number is. I'm very curious also.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it depends which channel too. Like lifecycle scale looks very different from paid marketing scale, where we're often like measuring that in terms of spend. There's always, in the MarTech land, like always the need to get our data house in order. I mean, that's even more true when you're working at scale where, you've got large marketing teams and they often become siloed. Definitions or metrics, underlying business logic change, and then suddenly like we don't know what data we're activating.
I don't think anyone can relate to that at all.
Yeah, right. And so this is a very universal problem. Like, I mean, maybe if you're a small, scrappy startup or a solopreneur, you know exactly like every single field and like the two tables you have. But like for most of us, like, data hygiene and standardization is usually a challenge. Data activation becomes that much harder when you're working with massive amounts of data. You've got thousands of tables, thousands of events with unclear taxonomy or standardization. So that's certainly like one of the challenges to solve for. I will say though, like there's also a bit of a myth to that of like having perfect data. Like no one's data is perfect. I think the biggest challenge though ends up being more people, because what often happens at companies of a certain scale, marketing orgs of a certain scale, oftentimes we start adding on products or new verticals, and we hire marketers to be in charge of those specific products or verticals. And they work in these silos in isolation of each other. And so, take the life cycle example. We're still like oftentimes emailing the same addressable audience across the board. So, let's say you've got a 20 or 30 person marketing team. What ends up being a challenge is all of this overlapping targeting. And how do you prevent things like email fatigue? Because we're sending, a product offer for one thing to the same user and a different product offer because, from an organizational standpoint, we've just decided to, this team is in charge of driving this outcome for this product, and this team is in charge of driving this outcome for this product. And we don't think about the tragedy of the commons that happens when we email all of our users too often. So a big part of that is like, how do we solve for this organizationally? I do think, especially in the lifecycle world, there's a huge need for having that sort of third party referee, whether it's a marketing ops person or whatever title you give it. Their job is air traffic control from a manual standpoint. Whether it's, and this becomes very hard to do when you're doing hundreds and thousands of campaigns, but understanding like at a very high level what's in flight and sort of like very rough targeting. And then I'd say like you can start to do more programmatic solutions on top of that. And so that's where things like ML solutions become very valuable. So Credit Karma, this was a massive problem we had where we had a lot of different verticals. We were sending billions of emails, often to overlapping audiences. And so one thing we found was like hey, even just having like a personalized frequency model, how do we, everyone's tolerance at a one-on-one user level for how many emails they want to receive is going to be different. And so, how can we make sure we're sending the right number of emails to the right user so that we prevent churn? And yeah, like that was not to say it was an easy solve, but this was like circa 2017, 2018, before AI was super hot. And so, like, these solutions have been in place for a while now. And so, yeah, it's a combination of, I'd say, manual people operations as well as more programmatic, often ML-based solutions.
For sure. Okay. Aside from email, you're extremely well versed in the world of CDPs, and I'm a big fan of them as well. And so we were actually first introduced by our mutual friend,
Yeah.
Bill Gamache of the Humans of Martech podcast. And I was also a guest. And so he's just the best human. Special shout out to him. We love our Canadian friends here in the States. In your episode you did with him, you championed warehouse native composable CDPs, but also noted latency issues. One, dive into that. And how do you decide what needs real time delivery versus batch processing? And also, I know pretty much every CDP, CCDP is working towards
Yeah.
real time, quote unquote. I still don't fully believe it. And also, I'm kind of a skeptic in general, but I want to hear all your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it depends on the use case and it depends on the channel. So take Lifecycle as an example, and specifically email. It's a very asynchronous channel. And so there should be like a really compelling business case for why we need real-time data, and especially controlling for we don't actually know when the user is actually going to open and engage with the email. So even if we do manage to trigger this email in real time, are they going to open it and see it in real time? Maybe, maybe not. If you've also figured out send time optimization, maybe, maybe not. Obviously, there are some use cases where you do want near real time, like password resets or sign up confirmation emails, abandoned cart. Probably a good thing. But for things like engagement or resurrection, and especially think about like why we're sending an email to begin with. Often it's, if we think about like resurrection use cases, right? Like they're already outside of the product. Like, are there other channels where we're already interfacing or engaging with them? If not, we're doing sort of a channel waterfall approach and then resorting to email, like, maybe it doesn't need to be real time. The other part too is if it is truly based off of a behavioral trigger, like those tend to be better near real
Correct.
time use cases than like, hey, we need to send like this nurture series or this win back campaign. Like, what did they actually do to initiate this? The other thing I would say is from an orchestration standpoint, like, where is the campaign orchestration happening? So for lifecycle, you're probably using some ESP, like a raise or an iterable to send out the campaign as well. Not all of that data needs to come from your warehouse via composable CDP. Like, you can also real time stream events. The challenge there is it is then often hard to enrich those events with additional customer attributes that you might have in your warehouse. And this is where I would love for someone to solve for that. Like, yeah, you can kind of
Pinging the world. Please create a solution here. Natalie and I will be very happy.
High Touch, I think, has come out with something recently. I haven't had a chance to investigate it. I do think like this is top of mind for a lot of people. Like, how do we solve real-time personalization? I think the first question is, do you actually need to solve for real-time personalization? I do think there's a ton of need, especially on web and in product experiences. And the solutions there I've been pretty unsatisfied with so far.
Underwhelming, to say the least.
Yeah, yeah. And like it still gets you in this very like segmented persona based level of personalization. I'd say it's still very hard to do that. I don't know, like we all aspire to that like Netflix level of personalization. Like you log in and you
Of course.
see, movie recommendations and even the actual content cards are like dynamically created to like engage with you and based off of who you are and your history. Like that is very hard to do. And I don't know if there's like any good third party tools that can deliver on that just yet. We'll see. I'm sure like someone's working on that. But yeah, I mean, depending on the channel, depending on the use case, warehouse native gets you very far. If anything else, like going back to data hygiene and data standardization, it solves for a lot of that versus a lot of the traditional off-the-shelf CDPs where you're just recreating data that already exists in your warehouse. It's also very expensive because you're paying for that additional storage cost. And then, of course, like you're naturally going to end up with like misalignment. What is the data source of truth? Is it in that third-party CDP, or is it in your sanctioned tables in your data warehouse somewhere? So, like from that standpoint, I think the data warehouse or warehouse native approach solves a lot of those problems.
Agreed.
It will be interesting to see if someone is able to resolve, like, how do we do real time event streaming and enrich it with the data that's already in your customer 360 or data warehouse? So, someone please solve for this. I'm waiting.
I have a feeling it's coming. And so, kind of in that same vein, speaking of predictions within the composable space, where do you see the next 2 to 3 years going, especially now that AI decisioning is more of a prominent option? I'm curious where your head's at.
Yeah, I mean, CDP as a category space has been very fuzzy in general. So, first off, there's been this trend of like everything is converging into CDPs, like
Everything's a
ESPs.
360.
Yeah. Everything's trying to be a CDP. But going back to it, like, I think composability is more important than ever, especially in the world of agentic AI and with software development costs going down to, I don't know, quite cheaply. Like, the build versus buy calculation has probably started to shift quite a bit. And so, why would you buy an off the shelf solution with all these bells and whistles that you don't really need? So, the composability piece is going to be more important than ever because people are going to have more opportunity to pick and choose the things they actually need for their business needs. Composability will continue to be a trend. Everything is going to converge into a CDP. I kind of hate CDP as a category space because, like personalization, it means everything and nothing at the same time. You talk to data engineering, their concept of what a CDP is very different from a marketer. Going back to why composability is important is like when we talk about CDP and you break it down to its core components, often it's maybe data ingestion, data storage, data transformation, and then data activation. Like, which CDP service are we actually talking about and honing in on? Going back to the like, what is the actual CDP? Is it your warehouse? Is it your data activation tool? It's just like a very confusing name and jargon that we don't need. And as tools like
Yep.
ESPs become CDPs, like what does it even mean to be a CDP at this point? Like which part of the data value chain and data orchestration and activation value chain are they solving for? Is it the data transformation part? Is it data activation? So yeah, like again, composability I think will be more important because what we're really trying to solve for are the various different services that CDPs are meant to solve for.
100% agreed in that one, CDP is super fuzzy. It's always been fuzzy. The first time I encountered CDP as a concept and then did a demo with a very large vendor, at the end of it, I still had absolutely no idea what was said.
Yeah,
And I was the most technical person on the call.
yeah,
And that's not a good look
yeah,
when you can't even explain what your product does well. And so, whenever I'm talking to folks about CDP, I always have to level set and ask, what are you thinking of when
yeah,
you think of CDP? Because oftentimes it's a pie in the sky concept, or it's truly just one singular use case and they don't need a CDP,
yeah.
but it's all so dependent.
Yeah, I mean, even from like a B2B sales standpoint, like who's their ICP or ideal customer profile? And it's hard to solve for when it's this like amorphous bundled solution. Is it data engineering? Is it marketing? It's very
Yeah.
hard to sell marketers, especially in, I don't know, scrappier startups, like the value add of a CDP from like a campaign owner or campaign operator. Like, what is this actually solving for me? Like, it's actually like very difficult to sell. um,
It is. And that's where I've found the most success whenever I've had to build business cases or champion for on behalf of folks. It's, hey, this is a tool that's not going to just serve marketing.
yeah.
Because I think any and everyone knows the feeling of, I hate the concept of like the marketing stink, where it's just like, it's just marketers sending pretty little emails or these
Yeah.
things. No, in reality, we're actually making transformational campaigns that can really do something and move the needle. And we're the largest ROI bringer of things. Like, ACK is spending all the money to get folks in, but we have to keep them. That is
Yeah.
where you save the money. And so I found great success where not only are you supporting and empowering marketing, you're empowering sales, product, engineering. Obviously, all the mixture of variables and ingredients are different at every company and depending on your business model. But the more you're able to make a tool multi-purpose in a Swiss Army knife, not only is the business case easier, but the understanding of how everyone's going to use it in a different way, but in a singular same way at the same time makes the sell a lot easier. And I think that's the missing component for
Yeah.
both internally selling, but also externally with vendors too.
Yeah, that's why I'm also very bullish on the warehouse native CDP or composable CDP approach. Partly because, like, you look at a lot of the off-the-shelf CDPs, they're very much in service of marketing use cases. But if you think more broadly, data activation is not just the purview of marketing. The same data that powers all of our BI dashboards that finance uses or product uses, like, that should be the same underlying data we use to build audiences in marketing. And that should all start with our source of truth, which is in the warehouse.
I mean, we should have a standardized understanding and definition of everything across every department. What do you mean?
I mean, that might be wishful thinking. It's a good end goal
Aspirational.
it's
Yes,
aspirational. Will we
without
ever
a doubt.
get there? I don't know.
I mean, a stride is a stride. You got to take 5 steps forward to get 4 steps back, but you're still a step forward.
Brought to you by our sponsors. Looking for a smarter way to activate your customer data? Meet HighTouch, the leading composable CDP and AI decisioning platform trusted by brands like Domino's, Chime, Aritzia, and PetSmart. With HighTouch, you get the flexibility of composable architecture, powerful self-serve tools for marketing teams, and industry-leading time to value. That's why companies choose HighTouch as the clear choice to personalize every interaction. See what HighTouch can do for you at hightouch.com/MSOM. And now back to the hot seat.
All right, shifting gears slightly, you kind of mentioned about building versus buying in this current atmosphere of potentially vibe coding or just reduced engineering costs. It's my favorite age-old question, but I'm curious from your perspective because I know you've worked with in-house
Mhm.
homegrown solutions as well. You invest internally, or do you go with a third party? Like, what is your approach to deciding when to pivot between one or the other? Very curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, even before the emergence of generative AI, I'd still say like the dichotomy between build versus buy, it's never been either or. It's always been a little bit of both. Like even when you buy a third party solution, you still always need developer solutions to build the integration, to connect it to your data. So there's always like a component of build with buy. Like we're never going to get away from it. I've talked about this before, but like depending on the company, I, often engineering and developer resources are often your most precious resources. And most of us don't have the luxury of working at a company where we have dedicated developers or engineers, especially to help solve marketing use cases. And so, unless what you're building internally ends up being a core capability that you can ship externally, in my point of view, like historically, it hasn't really been worth it to build. I can say, like, as someone who has worked with a homegrown CRM tool before, it's not very fun.
Can't relate.
I mean, it's not gratifying too from a campaign operator lens. Partly like often the UI or UX lags a little bit. If you think about like an Iterable or Braze, these are massive companies that have engineering resources specifically focused on making this like a delightful, maybe that's a stretch, but making these like usable tools that
We're seamless.
right. A little bit harder to replicate internally if like the CRM tool is just sort of an afterthought. And so like from a fintech lens, like the question I would always throw out, like, are we a fintech company or are we an ad tech company? Like, do we want to be spending our engineering resources building internal marketing and ad tech tools when we could be focused on building core product capabilities that will provide a better user experience overall? And so that's historically been my perspective. I do think we're very much in flux. If Sam Altman's right and we're already at the start of the singularity, I don't know what's going to happen, but
And like where MCPs come into play,
yeah.
all of the above.
Right. The cost of building internally may have just changed dramatically. I mean, are we going to be able to vibe code our way to a workable CRM tool? I haven't seen that quite yet. What I would hope is like an intermediary step is even when we buy these internal tools, interoperability is still a massive problem. Data hygiene is still a massive problem. I think there's a ton of opportunity to solve this first using agentic AI, basic core Gen AI capabilities before we start like using a cursor or a windsurf to like replicate that third party tool. Like, let's start with like, hey, like the MarTech paradigm has always been around like, how do we get our tools to talk to each other and connect with each other? We still haven't solved for that. And so, like, if we can start there, that would be
Correct.
a great place to start.
It would be. Well, and I also think of the longer term consequences, not just of building it in-house, all of the potential tech debt and things you've already mentioned, but also from a skill set hiring standpoint. If we're not on some aspects of standardized platforms and tools, the transferable skills, obviously they're there, but it's hard to recognize from a hiring perspective. Oh, this
Yeah.
person has used Marketing Cloud and Iterable. So they understand scale and personalization and complexities versus, and this is not a diss at MailChimp or any of the
Yeah.
smaller ESPs, it's a different capacity and understanding and level of technicality. And you won't be looking for someone who has 5 years of MailChimp experience to bring on omni-channel, multi-channel, CEP in the same capacity.
Yeah.
And so it's by no means a standardized test because those are
Yeah.
not even acceptable in their own regard, but it is a barometer for understanding who you're working with
Yeah.
and what they're capable of. And so there's so many question marks, even if we get it to be so reasonably priced, then how
Yeah.
do we know folks can actually handle what they're supposed to be in charge of?
Yeah. I mean, that's also just a reality of the hiring market. Everyone wants a plug and play employee who has experience working with the exact tech stack that, this brand may have. Yeah, you see that a lot with people who have worked at Meta, where they're very focused on internally built solutions. Like you hear a lot of grumblings from employees where like it becomes harder to sell that experience externally when they're on the job
Oh,
market
for
again.
sure. And they're not alone. Airbnb and Lyft also, I mean, each one of those companies also has an instance of one of the major platforms for a very specific use case and a department. But when you have all these internal tools, it gets harder for observability and alerting when things go wrong because you might not have the mechanisms in the same capacity if it was your
Yeah.
primary product. Yeah, lots of thoughts here. All right, as previously mentioned in the very beginning of the episode, you were part of Mo Engage's Adapt or Die book. And one, I was really excited to see your name there and obviously Grammarly's name there. And so what you discussed there is that there's so many tech players, part of every tech stack. And how do you consider and think through a North Star metric that aligns both engagement signals, but also bottom line impact?
Yeah, I mean, that's always tough. Like, how do you find that thing that unites everyone? And like we talked about before, like everyone's kind of chasing silos and optimizing for different outcomes, which, creates incongruent and fragmented user journeys and experiences. So, like on one hand, we're all sort of optimizing for LTV, but you can't optimize for LTV. It's too laggy of an indicator to actually activate and operationalize. But what you want to find are sort of those proxy metrics and signals that indicate someone is going to become LTV, or the interventions and experiments you're designing have an influence on long-term LTV and retention curves. And so, what you usually want to find is one, it needs to be time bound, and that time bound piece should align with sort of the natural frequency or cadence of the product. So, Grammarly, as an example, like very much oriented around daily active users because people write on a daily basis. Something like, an Airbnb, the natural frequency of that product is going to be much longer because how often are people in the market to buy a vacation rental? And so, one, that time bound piece should align with how users should be engaging with the product. The other part is the actual metric that you're measuring or optimizing for should connect to some business value or tell you that users are getting some kind of business value out of this. So, like going back to the rideshare example, like an Uber, right? Like you would do like number of rides completed, or within the context of Grammarly, number of suggestions accepted. That tells us that someone's getting value out of the product and will continue to use it and is less likely to churn. Yeah, I mean, what I would say, Reforge has some amazing frameworks around how to
Yes.
arrive at your North Star metric. Elena Verna, who I think is both of our heroes, like also has a lot of great content on how to come up with your North Star metric. I think what's important is once you do come up with that North Star metric, making sure everyone's roadmaps actually roll up to those North Star metric outcomes versus everyone chasing their own independent outcomes. And so what often happens is marketing is chasing sort of surface level, channel level engagement. Even within product, right? We're often chasing specific growth funnel outcomes. And if we want that cohesive experience, we need to make sure it's still rolling up into that North Star metric that's highly correlated with long-term retention and LTV.
Yeah, I totally agree. I also think there's such unrecognized value in actually having company-wide goals that every single thing you do ladders into them. And I've definitely have seen the failures where or maybe it isn't a really cohesive company-wide goal. There's more departmental goals, which a lot of
Yeah.
things contradict each other.
Yeah.
And it's not to the benefit of really anyone, both the employees, the customers, you name it.
Yeah, and when you're in a very cross-functional role like Martech, when you have myriad stakeholders that you're trying to keep happy, that's especially challenging to operate in because how do you prioritize against opportunities and initiatives from lifecycle versus paid versus in product? Even within lifecycle, often lifecycle spans the gamut of multiple growth funnels. And so even there, it becomes difficult to prioritize against different outcomes. So you need a North Star metric to normalize the outcomes of those initiatives so that you can actually prioritize and think through opportunity costs and make sure you're working on the most impactful thing.
And it only gets more complicated if you aren't just a straight B2C or B2B business. If you're a B2C to B or B2B to C, it gets real muddy real quick.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
is,
yeah.
that's where the juicy stuff, the fun stuff is, but also the harder uphill battle as well. All right,
Yeah.
I want you to dream up your most ideal MarTech stack. You're working at a brand new high volume company and you are solely in charge of building the stack because nothing exists yet. They've got such product market fit. So many folks are on it outside of, logging in. Everything is in product. What is your dream scenario set of tools? And maybe you can do two options of each category if you want, just to spice it up, have some options. But I want to hear what you would dream of.
Yeah. I mean, one, data warehouse. Is that the domain of MarTech? You know,
I would
like
argue it's partially.
definitely like a modern cloud-based data warehouse, Databricks or Snowflake. To be honest, like I don't have skin in the game for either one, but like worked with both. Either one's good enough. On top of that, a reverse ETL or data activation tool. I'm a big fan of High Touch for what it's worth. Like one, I love their content. I think they have some of the most forward-thinking content around MarTech. I think they were very forward-thinking as far as the shift from some of the traditional ESPs to the composable CDP space. So a reverse ETL tool like a High Touch or a Census on top of your data warehouse. I assume there's probably some lifecycle channel because it's always good to have a direct line of communications with your users. So certainly an ESP, probably a Braze or an Iterable. Again, like either one I think is probably going to get the job done. CMS, certainly like I'm a big fan of the headless CMSs. So a Contentful. Experimentation is an interesting space. I've seen a lot of success with homegrown experimentation tools. There are some like interesting experimentation platforms out there. Statzig is interesting. That said, like
Okay.
I would love to see a third party experimentation tool that like really like one of the things to solve for with experimentation is making sure user assignments and bucketing is truly centralized. I still see this all the time where like you onboard an experimentation tool and marketers are still setting up experiments and user assignments outside of the experimentation tool in their ESP or, using some other tool to do like randomization. And so then you end up with like a lot of data interference and issues with like not being able to isolate like which experiment intervention actually drove like the outcome. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like paid advertising, I think that's going to be very dependent on the type of business and business model. You need to figure out which ad networks where you have channel market fit, depending on who your
Where your
audience
customers
is.
are.
Yeah, exactly. So, obviously like all the major ad networks, but like take it or leave it based off of like who your users are and like where you're most likely to find and engage with them. But yeah, what I'm really excited about too is like how do we start building a more AI native or AI growth native infrastructure and tech stack. And by that, I mean, like, how can we start using, MCP servers to connect all of our tools? Like, there's still going to be like myriad little third-party tools that we're probably using on top of these major platforms. Again, like, how can we do a better job of connecting all of them to make sure we're truly sharing the same audiences, that we can truly orchestrate these cross-platform journeys, which is still very difficult to do. I think like that's going to be the exciting and emerging new development that we see in Martech stacks in the next year or two.
Agreed. I think that's the biggest unlock, and we all just have to start experimenting. But also with the big asterisks of there's no regulation, there's no formalized ethics or even moral code around where
Yeah.
privacy is in place. So there's definitely a lot of risk mitigation involved with that experimentation. And
Yeah, did
so,
you see the MCP connection with HubSpot? Like, on the one hand, like that looks super cool. On the other
of course,
hand, like I don't know, like having some agent interface with all of your CRM data, and then potentially taking action, which in this case is like sending an email to like your entire user base, like a little high risk.
yes, without a doubt. I think it's one of those you want to be an early adopter, but you don't want to be the first adopter.
You want to be the first one to fail epically in a very
Yes,
public way.
exactly. Well, it's kind of like you don't want to be your ESP's largest volume sender because
Yeah.
you're the reason things are going to break. You don't ever want to be that number one dog in that regard. But yeah, on the same page. Okay, to wrap us up, who else should we have on the podcast?
Oh, well, obviously Elena Berner, because we've name dropped her a
Let's
few
do it.
times.
Let's manifest it.
Keith Jones from OpenAI. He was on Phil's podcast recently and like
He
had a
was.
lot of really interesting takes. I think he would like, I would love to talk or hear his perspective on the future of the Martech stack. Anyone from Credit Karma marketing is great.
Sounds like I need some introductions.
I'm happy to make some intros, although like they may not be at Credit Karma anymore. I need to like do
That's
some
fine,
LinkedIn stalking. I think we need to get some like who's really dialed into the agentic AI space right now and separating
for
like
sure.
what is hype and theoretical,
What
which
is
yeah,
fact versus fiction?
what can we actually do right now?
Right.
Especially like what can we operationalize today? Because I think it's still really hard to figure out in this space what is like still aspirational versus I can make this initiative in my upcoming quarterly roadmap.
100% agreed. Thank you so much, Natalie, for being on here. Where can folks find you and learn more, hear more of your hot takes?
Hmm. Well, I did just vibe code my own website.
Oh, you want to plug it?
Yeah, like everyone, you should be doing that. Like, code your own website. If like nothing else, like it's good for your own brand. It's good like exposure to some of the tools out there. So I have the domain nataliemiles.me. Hopefully you can remember that. Where else can you find me? LinkedIn, although I'm not the best. LinkedIn's gotten like very noisy. So, you
It
can
is
find me
noisy.
there. And I'm
Apologies
often,
for contributing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then I'm often out at like a lot of the MarTech industry things. So, feel free to say hi.
Well, thank you so much for being on the pod.
Yeah, my pleasure. Always a pleasure speaking with you, Jacqueline.
I appreciate you.